Hey everyone, absolutely a pleasure to be here today. I actually just want to start off by thanking the Upbit team and the Dynamo team because it's been a phenomenal event so far. Been able to get to meet some amazing people. I was actually speaking to the founder of Dynamo in between one of the events, and he was telling me that he intended for this year's event to be a lot more intimate than previous years, and I've been definitely getting that feeling because I've been able to meet some phenomenal people, some people that I actually look up to in the industry. So thank you guys for hosting such a great event. So now let's talk about Avalanche. Today we're going to be talking about Avalanche, a little bit more about the technology, and a little bit about our, dominance in the Korea market so far, and how we're going to continue to hopefully keep that up. So my name is Usman Asim, one of the developer relations engineers here at Ava Labs. Let's kick it off. So we've actually been, greeted by a lot of awesome different blockchain partners here today at the conference. We've heard a lot of great talks from some great names. But I wanted to kick off with a little bit of an introduction to Avalanche if anyone is not familiar. It's a little bit different than some of the networks that we've been, introduced to today. We're actually a network of networks. So I want you to think of Avalanche as not one singular blockchain, but instead a network of many different blockchains, right? So where today we've heard from a lot of networks that have very unique capabilities to each individual network, we actually have the ability to host multiple different networks within our umbrella of blockchains. So Avalanche is a network of networks, with the idea being that we can scale infinitely, right? With multiple different participants, infinite number of validators in theory, without sacrificing any of the scale and efficiency that comes with operating at such a large validator base. To discuss a little bit more before we get into the actual nitty-gritty of the technical side of what makes Avalanche Avalanche, and a little bit of the business side of what we're doing here in the Korea market, I want to take it back to first principles a bit, right? At the base layer of everything that we're doing here today, we're all here because we are interested in blockchain, right? But I think a fundamental question that we need to ask ourselves is, what is a blockchain at its base layer, right? And at a base layer, a blockchain is just a ledger that records transactions. What's really unique about it, though, is that this ledger is composed in data arrays that are composed of blocks, right? And these blocks are cryptographically linked together, making so that we have now a new data structure that is censorship resistant, transparent, and the idea is to not have any central control, right? And what's really interesting, though, is that these databases are actually secured by a number of many different computers within the network, right? And that's what makes these platforms, quote unquote, decentralized. And so the idea of coming to agreement on all this data is something called consensus. Consensus has been studied within computer science for 20 plus years. We've had classical consensus since the 1970s, right, which computer scientists have been studying. Classical consensus is battle tested, but the problem with classical consensus is that it was happening in very small validator testing environments. So we've typically only seen 100 validators in typical environments with classical consensus. And they have this 33% security threshold. So if you get more than 33% of the network, then you can kind of take control over it. In 2008 and 2009, I think this is where we're all going to start being a little bit more familiar. We were actually introduced to something called Nakamoto consensus. So it took this idea of computers agreeing on this decentralized ledger and made it so that we could scale to many thousands of computers within that network, creating this decentralized network. That's where Bitcoin was born, creating this decentralized censorship-resistant currency. But the problem with Nakamoto consensus is that when we start scaling to these infinite thousands and thousands of validators, it becomes really hard to coordinate among those validators, right? So the network becomes slow, it becomes clunky, and it becomes expensive. And that's where Avalanche consensus was born. So before the Avalanche blockchain network, which we just discussed, the Avalanche network of networks, Avalanche consensus was the fundamental building block of all this. So the idea with Avalanche consensus was that we wanted to be able to scale to infinite number of validators, like with Nakamoto consensus, but we didn't want to sacrifice any of the efficiency that comes with that. So we came up with this really cool consensus algorithm that essentially allows for thousands of validators to be present within a network with achieving true finality within under 2 to 3 seconds. Really powerful stuff. And on top of that, we built this network, right? And so the Avalanche primary network is primarily composed of 3 different blockchains. Like I mentioned earlier, Avalanche is a network of many different blockchains, but these are the 3 that we initially built when we started the company. Avalanche is composed of 3 different chains: P chain, X chain, and C chain. To give you guys just a little bit of insight into each one, the P chain is where we coordinate all the validators. All the validators are coordinated. The creation of new blockchains is taking place through this platform. The X chain, which is actually initially a UTXO chain, kind of similar to Bitcoin, was kind of created to transfer assets between different networks and act as this bridge chain. And then we took the EVM that was present within Ethereum, put it on top of on top of the Avalanche consensus, and built the C chain, which is essentially a fork of the EVM built on top of our consensus. So if anyone has used the EVM here today, you know that when you click the send button or use any of those transactions, it can take anywhere from 10 to 15, 20 minutes to send that transaction and finalize within the blockchain. And it's actually super expensive and clunky when the network starts to see scale, as it is recently with the markets being up. But on top of Avalanche consensus, you can achieve EVM finality and EVM transactions and smart contracts with true finality in under 2 seconds. Really big upgrade from traditional EVM environments. But this is just a little bit about the network that we built. But then we have this concept of subnets, right? And subnets are individual blockchains or individual networks that can be created and spun up by individuals like such as yourselves. So when you're spinning up your own subnet, we understand that the true value of blockchains is having your own digital ledger that you can control and use for whatever use case you would like, whether you want to run smart contracts on top of it, whether you want to have a supply chain, or any of these really cool use cases that we've really seen and that were discussed here today in previous talks. So with the subnet, you can launch your own custom blockchain, take full control of your network security, be fully compliant with AML, KYC regulations that are really heavy in the United States, actually. And speaking to some folks here in the Korean markets, they're actually starting to really hamper on those compliance issues as well. You can launch your own smart contract platform and have full control of the privacy within your network. So think about it like a fully custom blockchain catered to what you want and the way you want it to be built. So when folks start to hear this stuff, they really start to compare us to different networks, right? And they start to say, oh, well, I've heard of XYZ chain and I've heard of this chain. How does Avalanche fit into that comparison model? So like I mentioned here today, a lot of the chains that I have actually listed up here are single chain networks, right? Where they have one chain with their own specific logic that function the way that they do. Right? And some of these are some of my favorite platforms within the industry. I was actually just talking to someone from Solana earlier, gushing over how much I love Solana. But again, another single chain network, right? And so Avalanche is this idea that you have multiple different chains that can all have multiple different virtual machines with all their own custom individual logic for them. And as you can see with some of the stats, right, we achieve finality in under 1 second, energy efficiency, over 1,400 different validators within the network, and the idea is that we can scale to many more thousands in the future. And we run a proof of stake mechanism as well for civil resistance. So with Avalanche subnets, you have the ability to own your entire stack within the network. So like I mentioned earlier, you can control it at the validator level. You can control it at the virtual machine level. And so what that really does is that gives enterprises, institutions, and individual developers full freedom to build blockchains whatever way they want. That allows you to have a fully permissioned blockchain if you're an enterprise and institution or a financial organization that wants to have a fully permissioned private network that no one can see the transaction data of and you can take full advantage of that blockchain. Or we can build fully permissionless networks that are decentralized and can be completely censorship resistant and transparent for the world to see. It's really what you want it to be and what you want to build. We also have this notion of custom virtual machines. Every blockchain that has new logic within it, we're familiar with things like Solana running the SVM. There's new blockchains coming out called Aptos and Sui, which run things like the Move virtual machine. We touched on the Ethereum virtual machine a little bit earlier. All of those can be supported underneath this Avalanche umbrella. And that's the really cool part where even though all these blockchains can be completely different, running their own complete logic, you don't have to pick one side or the other. You can have everything underneath this one umbrella. And that's one thing that I was a huge fan of. And we have this notion of interoperability. So a lot of folks tend to ask, Okay, cool, you have all these different blockchains, but the truth is, if they can't communicate with each other, it really renders the ecosystem not as powerful as it can be. So we have this notion of interoperability, where subnets can exchange assets between different blockchains and different virtual machines, and create this really seamless ecosystem of exchanging assets and messages between one another. So this is like a typical example of what a subnet might look like. Every blockchain has its own sets of requirements and things and sets of infrastructure that you need when running a blockchain. So things like RPCs, explorers, indexers, things of that nature, you would kind of get that from a third-party service or run it through our managed subnet service, which is called Ava Cloud, or you could spin it up yourself, as most people tend to do because they really like this idea of decentralization and having the openness to do whatever you'd like. And you can build your custom blockchain on top of it, have it communicate with all the different networks that are present within the Avalanche umbrella, and modify it the way you'd like. So this is just a little bit of an illustrative example of how this might look in a traditional banking environment, right? Where you have a blockchain run by bank number one, let's call it JP Morgan, which has their own blockchain embedded called USD, right, running US dollars. And they want to be able to transact with a bank two in a different jurisdiction in a completely different country, running their own blockchain that maybe only runs on euros. And then we have another bank that maybe runs in Japan, and they have Japanese yen, or in Korea with Japanese or Korean won. So we can allow for all these private banking networks to be able to interoperate with each other, achieve finality instantly, and really create this dynamic ecosystem of multiple different blockchains that can communicate and be within this one umbrella. This is just another bit of how that might work on a deeper layer. So you can see that we have, the Swiss franc, euro, Singapore, all being able to living underneath this umbrella and being able to exchange assets freely between one another. So now let's talk about who's actually building within this ecosystem. Because, again, the technology is so open and free for you to build whatever you'd like, we have seen a lot of interest between many different blockchain companies that are native Web3 that want to be all involved within this ecosystem. So we support all major EVM-compatible wallets, custodians, exchanges, and things of that nature. Because, again, our C chain is EVM compatible, and many of the subnets that are launching today are also EVM compatible. So you get to see that many of these existing companies within the ecosystem, such as Coinbase, Fireblocks, DYDX, etc., they get to just completely port over their code, port over their software, and launch seamlessly underneath the Avalanche umbrella because we are EVM compliant. And then you also get to see that many institutions and enterprises are looking at this technology and saying that, wow, we love the idea of being able to run our fully permissioned private network underneath this umbrella as well. So just how we touched on the previous iteration on being completely permissionless, on the opposite side, you have fully permissioned networks that are able to launch here as well. So when you look at these lists of names, you get to see many that maybe you guys are familiar with, definitely some that I'm familiar with, and I was able to really get excited to see that a lot of these major corporations, they've typically utilized prehistoric blockchains, to say the least, right? Ones that are, when they want permission blockchains, when they want fully compliant networks, they typically go to something like a Hyperledger Fabric, right? Or a Quorum, if anyone's worked with those in the past. But they've never been able to take advantage of a public blockchain that offers them unlimited validator sets, instant finality, and full customizability at the virtual machine layer. And so when they get that, and then they have the ability to still be completely private and permissioned, they really get excited. So that's kind of what we've seen here, where many different institutions and enterprises are building on Avalanche and really testing out a lot of new software and new use cases within their ecosystems in this permissioned manner. So one of the ones that I would love to touch on here today is SK Planet, right? And so we have a really robust BD team here in Korea that is doing a lot of amazing work, getting in front of some of the major conglomerates that are here present. So SK Planet is one of those, and if anyone is familiar with what they've been doing, they actually just launched their own dedicated subnet called UPTN, which will act as like this Web3 portal for their millions and millions of users that transact. So what they really focused on is this idea of loyalty and rewards, right? Where UPTN will serve as this loyalty and rewards platform for their users when they go to things like, K-pop concerts or movies or sports events, where now they can issue these NFTs to their users and take full advantage of blockchain and the use cases that they're really interested in this permissioned manner, and offer it to their many users without any sort of overhead that normally would come with launching a large blockchain. So this is something that's really cool. If you look at the Explorer data here, we've seen over 2.2 million transactions to date. I think that the subnet just launched within the past couple of months. It's only been around 3 to 4 months since the subnet has launched, maybe even less. And we've seen 2.2 million transactions to date on this network. That is all SK Planet utilizing it, offer these services to their users for whatever use cases they'd like, and they haven't really even gotten started yet. And that's the really interesting thing. And since the inception of this, we've seen 200,000 KYC users that have all launched on this network and all created wallets within this network. So when we talk about mass adoption, we talk about use cases that make sense to real institutions and enterprises that they can offer to their existing user base, right? We love to talk about mass adoption through many different things, but when corporations and enterprises can seamlessly launch blockchains that fit their use cases and fit their desires, they can really, as showcased by UPTN, launch in a really fast and seamless way. So if you want to see those transactions for yourself and see what's going on in the network, I put a little bit of a link right there underneath for the Explorer link, so you can log on yourself. There's transactions coming in every second. I was actually just checking it right before this, and there's still transactions being mined. It's a really cool thing to see when it's live right in front of you that SK Planet is bringing all these transactions within the blockchain network. And so, again, going back to what I was discussing a little bit earlier, that they have these wide variety of use cases. One of the most popular esports teams, if anyone is familiar with gaming and esports, T1, actually announced that they're launching their League of Legends NFT convertibles to their fans on SK Planet's subnet. Really awesome, because now we have this wide range of users and wide range of participants who may have never been familiar with blockchain before, who might just be gaming fanatics, who might just be fans of T1, who now have access to this new NFT and this new sort of rewards and loyalty program that they may have never been exposed to before. And this is all taking place on this one blockchain underneath the Avalanche umbrella. So you could really start to think that as many different corporations and enterprises start to explore their own blockchain use cases, that they have access to be able to do whatever they want, really, right? And so SK Planet is doing some really cool stuff. T1 being one of the largest esports providers here in Korea, they are being able to offer their NFT collectibles straight on SK Planet's subnet, and I'm sure we're going to see way more different large entities within Korea start to do really interesting things of their own within the SK Planet subnet and launching their own subnets as well. And so that's some really cool stuff that's happening on the loyalty and reward side. I really wanted to touch on this aspect of institutions who are also exploring the space for on-chain finance, which is this new term that we've kind of coined, OnFi. We're really familiar with DeFi. Again, like I mentioned, Avalanche is a fully open network, so you could build whatever you'd like. If you want to build a DeFi app that's completely permissionless and decentralized, you can do so. But what we've seen, because of the permissioned aspect and because you can launch fully private networks, is that we've seen major corporations and enterprises such as KKR, Intane Markets, wanting to do their own private blockchain financial services on-chain on an Avalanche subnet. So we saw KKR, which is one of the largest health growth funds in the United States, launch their $4 billion fund on Avalanche's C-chain, essentially tokenizing all those healthcare bonds and funds on-chain. So that opens up their capital base in a much more open way because it's all on-chain. It also reduced their investment minimums as well, which is a big problem and a big onboarding leap when it comes to traditional finance. And now you have smooth onboarding, which is completely digital, and a fund subscription process, which they weren't able to offer before. And this also just is another form of diversification for their fund investor sets. We've also seen things like Intane Markets, which has deployed their own tokenized MBS and ABS platform. And this is all taking place on a really cool subnet that we launched at Avalanche called Spruce. Spruce is essentially our form of a private blockchain that is geared towards institutions and enterprises who want to use blockchain. We've made it fully KYC and AML compliant that allows for them to launch on these networks and play around with DeFi apps and on-chain finance apps that they may not be familiar with, and do so with full regulatory clarity that what they're doing is going to be okay. Right? Because if they go to Ethereum mainnet or they go to even Avalanche C chain and they go around and play around with things like Ava or Uniswap or any of these other DeFi protocols, they're going to get a call from one of their regulators saying that, what are you guys doing, right? And so with full KYC and AML compliance, knowing that everyone who's on that blockchain is fully approved by them, they have full confidence that they're going to be okay and in the regulatory clarity. There's also some really cool traditional businesses that are migrating on-chain and bringing really cool traditional use cases as well on-chain. So cable finance is also really big in the FX market. Like I mentioned earlier, we're really big on FX and really bringing foreign currencies on-chain and allowing them to be able to transact cross borders with this near instant finality. Imagine being able to send US dollars to Korea instantly in under 1 second. Right? Or being able to send won on the other side in 1 second. So this is really cool stuff that I'm really excited about. We also have Vodafone, who is doing some really cool stuff with like the economy of things. And then Remedy, which is also something I'm really passionate about, which is decentralized science, right? And decentralized science healthcare. So what they're doing is they're bringing their healthcare databases on-chain and doing so very securely, because if anyone's worked in the healthcare industry or seen healthcare, it's actually a lot of corruption that happens in the background. You don't know what happens in terms of the drug supply chain, healthcare databases. Things can be changed, but because of blockchain and because of private blockchains, they're able to bring all that data on-chain and do so very securely. So that does it for Avalanche and what we're doing here in the markets. We're actually really exploring actively other use cases here in Korea and broadly. Thank you for having me. Would love to hear some questions.
Thank you very much for the great presentation. I believe that your experiences here will also be very helpful to some other companies who wish to venture into the Korean market. Thank you for your candid experience and also some other case studies from other companies as well. I do have one question that was submitted online, real time. So I'll throw that at you. From a user perspective, what do you think are the most important factors when choosing a specific layer 1 technology?
It's a great question, actually. So when transacting on blockchains, again, there's so many different networks out there, and they all have their own pros and cons, right? From a user perspective, when I'm transacting on a blockchain, I really just care about the fundamental aspects of what a blockchain can provide me, right? Whether I am a traditional finance institution, whether I'm a user just transacting on DeFi, or whether I'm transacting on some new social platform. I think one of the most important things is near instant finality, right? If I have to wait 10 minutes from the minute I click send on a tweet for that tweet to publish on the network, it's not going to be sustainable in the long term, right? Nor is anyone going to want to use that network. And we shouldn't be waiting for the advantages of blockchain, like censorship resistance, transparency, things of that nature, but sacrificing on efficiency, like waiting 10 minutes or 10 plus minutes for our transactions to finalize. So I think near instant finality is one of the really important ones. And then one of the more back-end ones is just the diversity of validator sets, right? When you're transacting on a blockchain, you want to know that there's thousands and thousands of validators that are participating in consensus, and that it's not just being run by 100 different computers in someone's basement and they get to control the network, and that when you post a transaction or you post a tweet that they don't like, they get to completely shut the network down or go back on it. So those two things I think are the most important, where it's efficiency and finality, and also diversity in validator sets.
Thank you for that update. Now I'd like to turn over to the floor if anyone has any questions. Yes, now we have Light.
How's it going, bro?
Doing well, man. How about yourself?
Not too bad. Quick question. So I really like Avalanche. It's an amazing blockchain, right? And thanks a lot for the intuitive presentation. So I'm just wondering, how do you define finality on Avalanche, and how does it handle rollbacks?
Yeah, great question. So the way I define finality is when that transaction is included in a block and that block has been posted to the chain. So if anyone is familiar with how a blockchain works, is there's a block. Once that block is fully set with all the transactions within that block and it's posted to the chain, that chain can never, or that block can never be gone back on, right? That, at least that's the idea. So within Avalanche, blocks are finalized within 2 seconds. So imagine if you send hundreds of transactions within this block of 2-second time frame, the minute that that block is added to this linear chain, it's finalized, and you can't go back on it. And that's what I define as finality. I know there's a lot of different definitions of what people think finality is and how it can actually be achieved, but what I view it as just adding it to the block, and once that block is posted, it can never be changed. When it comes to rollbacks, it's a great question. We haven't seen any rollbacks on Avalanche yet because, again, 2-second finality within blocks and then 1-second finality for transactions. So if a block is posted within 2 seconds, it's very hard for, within that 2-second time frame, for people to go back on those blocks unless they have full control over the network, right? Or unless they have control over more than 50% of the network, which we haven't really seen until now. I hope that answers your question.
Thanks. And speaking of 50% ownership, so I saw in terms of minting transactions on the network, it requires 2K tokens of Avalanche, right?
Correct.
So do you also have the concept of the more tokens you have, the more chances of you minting a block?
Oh, sorry. Go. Okay. Yeah. No. The 2K is just a minimum. Right, so there's no. If you have 10K coins within your validator and that's what's staking, that doesn't mean that your validator is any more important than their validator, which has 2,000 AVAX. It's just a minimum that allows for that validator to be functioning. What most people do is if they have more than 2K, they distribute like if they have 10,000 AVAX tokens, they distribute among many different validators, so they can have more nodes running. And if they do put all of that into one validator, what usually happens is they're doing it for more APY or return on their investment within that stake.
Okay, thank you. And last question, what is your smart contract based on? What programming language?
Yeah, of course. So our C chain, which is just one of the many smart contract blockchains that we have on Avalanche, EVM compatible, but there is a full wide range of many different blockchains present within Avalanche. So someone actually just launched a Move-based blockchain on Avalanche. So if anyone here is familiar with Sui or Aptos, they launched a fork of that as a subnet, so you could take advantage of Move if you wanted to. We have Solidity in our base C chain, but then what's really cool is that we're also starting to offer WASM, WebAssembly programming as well. We have a new SDK called the Hyper SDK where you can launch custom blockchains within a way shorter time span than it would normally take to build a custom virtual machine. And that SDK has WASM compatibility built into it. So you could really write smart contracts in Rust, JavaScript, C++, and we're really working to make it more robust. It's actually alpha software still, but it's coming very soon.
Awesome. Thank you very much.